He lost in part 1. Part 2 is the answer. Kong, Revenge of the Swamp Beast, Part 2.
Worked on himself in ways he never had before. He found the hardest surfaces on the island, the volcanic rock formations on the eastern ridge, the ancient stone pillars near the island's center that were older than anything that lived on it. And he used them. He drove his fists into them until they stopped hurting. He threw his body weight against them, learning the specific violence of impact in a new way. Not the impact of a creature that expects to win, but the impact of a creature that is preparing to endure. He pushed himself past the point where he would previously have stopped, past the point of exhaustion and into the place beyond it where something harder and quieter lives. The wounds healed. They always do. But they heal differently than wounds usually heal, leaving behind not just scar tissue, but a kind of structural memory. A body that knew what had happened to it and had reconfigured itself in response. His shoulders broadened further. The muscles across his back deepened. Even his hands changed slightly. The knuckles thicker, the grip stronger. The whole architecture of them refined by the specific demands of what he had been practicing against. But the most important change was not physical. It was the thing behind his eyes, the quality of his attention. Before the defeat, his attention had been the attention of certainty, wide, calm, taking in everything without urgency because nothing had ever required urgency. Now his attention had a different quality, focused, specific. It moved through the jungle not as light moves through open space, but as a blade moves through resistance, with direction and purpose, and the understanding that what it was moving toward mattered. The day he went back to the swamp, the jungle knew it before he arrived. The birds went silent a half-mile before he reached the water's edge, and the silence traveled ahead of him like a wave, announcing his movement to everything that could hear. He did not try to be quiet. He did not approach with caution or strategy. He walked directly to the edge of the swamp, and he stood there, and he made himself visible, and he waited. The swamp was still for a long time. Then the bubbles started, slow at first, then faster. Then the water began to churn in the way it had churned before, and the smell rose again, that ancient, terrible smell, and the bog monster began to emerge. It rose the same way it had risen before, in pieces, the shoulder first, then the head with its amber eyes, then the long, dragging arms. But this time, as it rose, it slowed, because something was different. Something had changed in the equation. The creature that stood on the bank was not the same creature that had stood there before. The shape was the same, the size was the same, but the quality of the stillness was different. Before, Kong had stood with the stillness of something that does not anticipate threat. Now he stood with the stillness of something that has already decided what it is going to do and is simply waiting for the moment to do it. The monster came out of the water fast, the way it had come before, with that same confidence of territory and darkness and ancient patience. And this time Kong moved not backward, but forward into the attack, ducking beneath the first sweep of those long, terrible arms and driving his shoulder into the mass of the creature with an impact that sent both of them crashing through the bank and into the shallower water at the swamp's edge. The monster tried to wrap him, tried to pull him into the depths the way it had before, and Kong let it get close enough to feel the grip forming, and then he twisted in a way he had practiced against stone for days, a specific violent rotation of his entire body that broke the grip before it could fully form, and brought his elbow around into the side of the creature's head with a force that was unlike anything he had brought to the first fight. The monster reeled. It was not a reaction Kong had seen before. It had not reeled in their first encounter. It had simply absorbed and continued. Now it reeled, and in that reel was information. The information that it could be hurt, that the specific force and angle of what had just happened had reached something inside it that could feel damage. Kong read that information instantly and acted on it before the monster could recover. He grabbed it by what passed for its neck, and he used his momentum and his weight and everything he had learned in the days of preparation, and he drove it down into the shallow water. Not the deep water where it was strongest, but the shallow water at the edge where the mud was thin and the roots of the bank gave Kong something to brace against. The monster fought. It was not a creature that accepted anything without resistance either. Its arms came around and found Kong, and the strength in them was enormous. The kind of strength that comes from something that has been accumulating it in dark water for longer than memory extends. It crushed, and Kong felt the pressure of it across his ribs and back, felt things strain that had not strained before. He roared, not with the confident declaration of a king claiming territory, but with the raw and urgent sound of something fighting through pain toward a goal. And the roar changed the fight in some way that was not physical. It changed the temperature of it, the meaning of it, the understanding of what was happening here. He broke the grip. He pushed through the pain and the pressure and the weight of the monster's arms, and he drove himself upward and forward, and he broke free into open air. And he turned, and this time he had both hands free, and he brought them together onto the back of the monster's head with a combined force that cracked through the swamp like thunder. And the monster went into the mud face first, and the mud exploded outward in a wave that reached the trees. What followed was not quick, and it was not clean, and it was not the kind of battle that exists in stories, with clean, decisive moments and clear turning points. It was exhausting and brutal, and went on past the point where either creature should still have been moving. Kong was cut in new places and old places, and his blood was in the water, and the water was black with it, and with the monster's own strange dark fluid that was not quite blood, but served the same purpose. The monster rose twice from what should have been final moments, pulling itself back together from the swamp in ways that defied the usual logic of damage. And each time Kong met it again, not with fresh strength, but with something more durable than strength, with the absolute refusal to allow any outcome other than the one he had decided on. The third time the monster tried to rise, it could not complete the movement. It got halfway out of the mud and stopped, the amber glow in its eyes flickering. And in the flickering was something that in another creature you might have called an expression, the specific configuration of a consciousness confronting a conclusion it had not previously considered possible. Kong stood over it. He was breathing in long, ragged pulls, and he was bleeding from more places than he could count, and the swamp mud was on him so thick that he was more mud than fur. And he stood over the monster, and he looked at it with those dark and now very clear eyes, and he roared one more time. This roar was different from every roar that had come before it. Not the claiming roar of a ruler marking territory, not the battle roar of a fighter pushing through pain. This was something else entirely. This was the sound of a thing that had been tested all the way to its foundation, and had found the foundation solid. This was the sound of an understanding that had been earned the hard way, paid for in blood and defeat, and days of solitary work against cold stone. This was the king's voice, but a king who knew now what kings are actually for. Not to stand above everything in comfortable authority, but to stand between everything and the things that would unmake it, at whatever cost, for as long as it took. The monster sank. Not quickly. It settled back into the swamp with a slowness that felt almost like acceptance, the way old things finally accept the end of their time, and the water closed over it, and the bubbles rose, and then even the bubbles stopped. The swamp was still, and the jungle, which had been holding its breath since before the fight began, released it all at once in a long, slow wave that moved through every leaf and branch and blade of grass on the island, a collective exhale, the sound of a world returning to its correct orientation. Kong stood on the bank for a long time. The rain came, the way it always came on Skull Island, not with warning, but as a fact, suddenly and completely. It came down cold and clean, and it washed him slowly, and he stood in it and let it wash him, his chest rising and falling, his eyes looking out over the still water of the swamp. Around him, one by one, the sounds of the jungle began to return. The insects first, then the frogs, then the birds. Layer by layer, the living noise of the island rebuilt itself. And each layer that returned was a confirmation, a small piece of evidence accumulating into a certainty. He turned eventually and moved away from the swamp, back up through the jungle toward the high ground. He moved slowly, not from weakness now, but from the particular unhurried movement of a creature that has nowhere it needs to be, because wherever it is exactly where it belongs. The trees made way for him as they always had, and the ground accepted his weight as it always had, and the island reformed itself around his presence the way it was supposed to be, with him at the center of it, not because he had declared himself the center, but because he had proven, again, in the hardest possible way, that the center was where he stood. At the top of the highest ridge, where the volcanic rock was black and slick with rain, and the sky was beginning to show the first gray edge of dawn along the horizon, Kong stopped. He turned toward that gray edge, and he watched it. Watched it the way he watched everything now, with attention that was specific and clear and earned. The gray became pale gold. The pale gold became light. The light spread across the sky above Skull Island in slow, enormous waves, and the island below caught it and returned it, the jungle going from black to green in stages, color returning to the world the way sound had returned, gradually and then all at once. And King Kong raised his head to the sky that was finally, slowly filling with light. And the sound he made was not a roar of victory. It was something older than victory and simpler than victory. It was the sound of presence, the sound of something saying, without words, without performance, without any audience in mind at all, I am here. I was always here. And I will be here when this day ends and the next one begins, and every day after that, for as long as there is a jungle to stand over, and a sky to roar into, and a reason to rise. The island heard it, and the island knew that its king had come home.